One guy in the movie says that the best thing about the wave is that no ethnic minorities are uh, excluded. Yes. So, how old were your students, and were there really whites, blacks, Chinese?
Yeah. Good question. Great question. In our school in 1967, at that time, we had black students coming in for the very first time. That's James Brown. And the white teachers in the white community really didn't know how to deal with that whole effervescence of we want to read our own books, we don't want to be labeled, we don't want to be cast into certain ability groups. They were really challenging the whole system, and it caused the universe just tilted right in front of us. And the black students were racially excluded from the wave, and that's not talked about in any form. It's really sad to me that the Norman Lear television version, the book that you've read, do not talk about racism, which played a critical part in this experiment.
You said you liked the feeling to be the leader, of course. I think everyone would like it. So, do you miss the feeling?
Oh, no, that's really interesting. I'm not sure I can totally explain this, and I've never talked about this before either. But I mentally have probably run away from it. You know, I recognize in myself that I could do certain things, and I probably ran away from it. It scared me too much.
When you just understood that your experiment went too far?
I knew the moment went too far when one of the students had followed me into the faculty room, which was verboten, and the teacher there addressed the kid by saying, "What are you doing in here? Students don't belong." And that child, which was Tim in the movie or Robert in the book, said, "No, I'm not a student, I'm a bodyguard." That's a very vivid memory of mine, and realizing that he had thought the wave was real, and I was beginning to think the wave was real. So I knew I was in trouble.
I just wanted to know, back to the movie, the end of the first movie is different to the end of the second movie. Do you like the new end, or it's a bit dramatic with blood and...
The question is, do I like the ending of the film, Welle, versus the original short film? And I think the Welle is much more in tune to the times. And oddly enough, it's a very parallel to what could have happened in 1967, because I did have a student in that class that had blown off his hand, and he was making bombs, and he was placing bombs on his body. So there could have been a greater tragedy in a wink of an eye. Maybe we got out of it just in time. So no, I think this is an appropriate ending. It causes us to think. And I have great sympathy. When I saw the movie the other night in Berlin, I mean, I'm sitting there crying for Tim. That the sadness of one child being so alone and so desperate, I just broke out in tears.
During the experiment itself, did you have a lot of people who supported you in what you were doing? So your family or...
Well, that's a good question in terms of support. Sadly, other teachers were kind of off on their own, so they're isolated, and we didn't have that connection which was needed at the time. I needed to have another teacher walk in the room and say, critically ask me, "What are you just doing? Well, why? Are you sure you want, you know?" But there was no teacher, there was no parent. But I was married, and my wife was the one that I trusted, and she's the one that saw what I was doing and questioned it critically and said, "You better stop it." So I was very lucky to have, a lifelong companion with me at that time.
I'm just personally interested in how your career developed after this experiment.
Oh, it's phenomenal. My career?
Your career, your personal and your
Okay,
professional career.
so I was fired 2 years after the wave for being involved in anti-war protests, which meant that I could never again teach in public schools, which I've never had that opportunity. But I found myself working in odd places that no one cared about, mental institutions, and for the last 30 years I've worked with the mentally and physically disabled. And that was a wonderful experience. They were very passionate. I learned about differences, real differences, and I learned how to include people rather than exclude.